Can we afford to cut taxes? Which political party is more pro-business? And how many Conservative MPs are plotting against the Prime Minister? This is Politics Live. Joining me, Conservative MP Brendan Clark-Smith, Labour MP Kim Johnson, Rosa Prince from Politico and Inaya Folarin-Iman from the Daily Mail. Today, the Chancellor says he'll struggle to afford big tax cuts in the budget.
It doesn't look to me like we will have the same scope for cutting taxes in the spring budget that we had in the autumn statement.
The Shadow Chancellor says Labour is now the party of business.
We understand British business. We are on the side of British business. We will back British business every day and every chance we get.
The BBC drama that inspired my guest Kim Johnson to try and change the law to prevent miscarriages of justice. We'll find out why.
Control must mean that the government defines the conditions for entry into the UK. If you arrive illegally, you don't have the right to stay and must therefore go somewhere else.
Some Conservatives want the Rwanda plan to be tougher, but do they also want to get rid of the Prime Minister? Well, you saw the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, there in the headlines. Just let's show you this story in BBC News. Jeremy Hunt, less scope for tax cuts in the budget, despite a few weeks ago hinting that actually there was scope for much more major tax cuts. Is he right? They're not going to be affordable, are they, Brendan?
I think this is classic expectation management, Jo. Treasury always keep the cards close to the chest, but there's also this fiscal responsibility. Chancellor wants to get that across there. If there are going to be tax cuts, it's got to be done the right way. They've got to be sensible. They've got to be sustainable. So I think he's just saying to people, step back a little bit and actually have a bit of a think about it.
Is he saying it to people or is he saying it to Conservative MPs who have been calling for significant tax cuts?
Well, I think everybody generally. We've just had the national insurance cut. People have been getting their pay slips this month and noticing a little bit more money in there. So certainly there will be some tax cuts. He has indicated this. We don't know exactly what that's going to be on yet. There's been speculation in the past about inheritance tax or whether it's income tax or child benefit.
What would you like to see if there are further tax cuts?
I think inheritance tax generally is something that I don't agree with morally, but I think in terms of my constituents, I think something really that would help families would be better. So again, either NI, income tax, something to do with child benefit, or for businesses, maybe IR35 is another one.
Kim Johnson, what do you make of what you've just heard from Jeremy Hunt, the most recent iteration from the Chancellor about tax cuts? Should he go for big tax cuts in this budget?
Well, what I would say is that we need a progressive tax system in this country, Jo. You know, we've had 14 years of austerity. A lot of our local authorities are going into bankruptcy. We need a tax system that provides us with the funding to give to local authorities so that, you know, services delivered to the most vulnerable are able to be
So would you like to see a Labour government increase taxes on certain people?
I think those with the broader shoulders should be able to be taxed so that we have the funding available to support our, you know, crumbling public services.
Right. Are you disappointed that so far Keir Starmer has said that he won't increase taxes on those with the broadest shoulders?
What I would say about the party at the moment, you know, when we're in government, we don't know what kind of economic system we're going to have, where we're going to be. And I suppose for Keir to be cautious at the moment in time is the right thing to do.
Rosa?
I think what's really interesting about what Jeremy Hunt said today is that it really throws up the dilemma of Rishi Sunak's whole government, which is he quite a kind of right-wing tax-cutting Prime Minister, or is he the sensible, I'm a moderate, I'm looking after everything, nothing to see here kind of Prime Minister? And Jeremy Hunt seems to be indicating it's the latter. The problem is that just a couple of weeks ago, when he was in Davos, that sort of party in the snow that the economic chiefs all go off to, he was saying exactly the opposite. He was saying, yeah, I don't believe that we should be taxing this much. I'm going to be looking into this. And now he's sort of having to do a reverse ferret, presumably because he's had bad news from the forecasters and isn't going to be able to do those tax cuts. So I think there's a real problem there of a lack of consistency and a lack of image and projection about what this government is about.
And I?
I mean, we've had a Conservative minister resign quite recently, George Freeman, because he said that his mortgage went from, I think, what was it, £500 or £800 to £2,000 a month. So that's just a minister. Many people, ordinary people, are seeing their mortgages increase exponentially, their rents increase exponentially. We've also seen food inflation. So whatever tinkering tax cuts that the government has already announced is not going to make a substantial difference to the fact that people are really struggling at the moment. I think tax cuts would be even just a mild relief for the cost of living crisis that people are feeling, that they can have more money to be able to spend as they choose to support their families. I think that we're not talking about, ripping the rug under public services, but right now people are really squeezed, and I think tax cuts could be part of the solution to actually giving people some light relief.
Are the Tories having an identity crisis over tax cuts or not?
No, I just think we're being pragmatic, really. Again, as we were just saying, things like thresholds is something else. A lot of people being dragged into that 40% band who aren't necessarily affluent. You may only have one earner in the household as well, so there's an imbalance there. So we've just got to be sensible. It's not fantasy economics. You know, we'd all love massive income tax cuts. I'm a small state Conservative. I want people to keep more of their money. But at the same time, we have got to pay for these services, and we've got to pay down the debt, Jo.
Kim?
I would say that, and I mentioned about the cost of living crisis, you know, we have massive issues at the moment in terms of poverty. You know, we've got people working on precarious contracts. You know, they haven't enough money in their pocket to feed their family. We're having these crises at the moment about, you know, heat or eat. Children going to school with empty belts. So we need a system that supports the most vulnerable in our society at the moment.
Brendan?
Well, even Labour's announcement today, they're pledging to keep our corporation tax level. They've not said anything about tax rises. So if there's going to be this extra spending, where is it going to come from? Even this 28 billion figure that's been floated about green jobs and everything, so on, they can't really make up their minds with it. So again, where is the money going to come from?
Kim?
Again, progressive taxation. We've got companies.
We already have a progressive tax
I don't think
system.
we have, though, now. We don't, you know, because those with the broader shoulders aren't paying enough tax to support
you know,
the
a very
system
small
at the moment.
proportion of the country pay a very large proportion of the tax bill. I think this idea that, you know, the wealthy or even middle income earners are not paying their fair share, I just think is frankly untrue.
And I would have to disagree. You know, we've got wealthy people in this country, you know, earning the highest 1%. You know, they've benefited. During COVID, during this last 14 years, we've seen a massive increase in billionaires, while those on the lowest income are reliant on food banks. Children going to Hungary to school is immoral in the fifth richest economy in the world. That's what we've got at the moment.
Well, let her answer.
Nobody wants people or children to go to school hungry. But I think we also need to talk about creating wealth and, you know, creating the conditions for people to be able to, you know, start businesses, build wealth for their families. It's not solely about redistributing from people that have earned money to people in low incomes. You also have to create wealth.
Well, that takes us on to the next headline in the Times. I'll break cycle of crisis. Starmer, the Labour leader, to promise business. And now we have this line out of the Labour Party's business conference. It was sold out. It's been headed up by Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor. Labour will not raise corporation tax above 25% if it wins election, says Rachel Reeves. Well, we're joined now by Labour Shadow Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall here in Westminster. Thank you for joining us. Why has Labour decided to freeze corporation tax at 25% for the whole of the next Parliament? There's potentially a lot of money, as we were just hearing from your colleague Kim Johnson, that you're ruling out there that could be used on public services.
Because the absolute priority for Labour is to get the economy growing again, because that is the key to putting money back into people's pockets so they can pay their bills and live the life they choose, and to getting money for our vital public services.
But Keir Starmer, Liz, in his 10 pledges, many of which have been reversed since he made them, broadly said that he would raise corporation tax. But now you're going to stick with the current level. Why the change of heart?
Because businesses have told us, above all, what they need is stability. You know, we've had 5 Prime Ministers, 7 Chancellors. We've had the catastrophic budget from Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, which really, really knocked confidence of British business, but also businesses across the world. And this is the key, getting the economy growing again is the key to all the things that we are passionate about, that ordinary people should be able to pay their bills, that children shouldn't grow up in poverty, that we shouldn't have a society with so many food banks. So unless we get the economy growing, and it's businesses that do that, that's why it's so important. It's not just about some sort of headline about, you know, we've got a good relationship with business. It's why do we want that? We want that because growing the economy is key to Labour's plan for ordinary working people and for social justice.
Well, you've mentioned those two things, which is certainty or stability on wanting to grow the economy. Now, you've delivered certainty on corporation tax today, which businesses need for planning and investment. Why can't you then give those same businesses the certainty on green spending or green investment and Labour's £28 billion pledge? Because that would also be crucial to your growth plan, as you have said, because the Shadow Business Secretary said, I can't pledge that we'll hit that particular level because the health of the economy is obviously one of the driving factors around that. So you're not giving certainty on that.
I don't agree with that analysis, Jo. We have set out quite bold and ambitious plans to make sure that public investment leverages in private investment, so we create the good, high-paid jobs of the future in clean energy.
Sure,
whether that's
but it was a pledge. You've talked about certainty and you've given that on corporation tax. That was a pledge on £28 billion of investment.
And then
now it's not a pledge because he can't pledge it.
After that, Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng crashed the economy. And actually today, Ian Anderson, the boss of Cicero, who actually was a Tory party member for 39 years and now has done a review that we've published today, said businesses understand when the economic context changes, that's obviously got an implication for government.
Right, well, so your Shadow Business Secretary is right that it is no longer a pledge for the reasons you've said.
Right, that it is our ambition that by the second half of this Parliament we'll get that investment going in to leverage in the private sector investment too. Businesses know we have a long-term plan here, and I believe whether that's on onshore or offshore wind, carbon capture and storage, electric vehicles, businesses know we will have a long-term plan there that they can have the confidence to put their investment in, and that my constituents can get better paid jobs, can properly get cheaper energy, and so that we're not so at risk as we've seen with the international situation when Russia invaded Ukraine. A long-term plan and certainty is what my constituents and the country desperately need.
Although there are some business leaders who think that isn't certain anymore when it comes to that particular pledge. Let's talk about bankers' bonuses, because Labour are not going to reimpose the cap on bankers' bonuses, and that's despite Rachel Reeves taking a very dim view of Jeremy Hunt not actually pressing ahead in terms of keeping that cap and deciding to lift it instead. But now Labour isn't going to reimpose it either.
Well, you know why it was put in the first place, Jo, which was because of the financial crisis, and that there was a real concern that these bonuses were driving risky behaviour from investors. We've now got a different system of regulation in place, the capital investment that banks are required to have, and we have the ability to claw back or retain parts of those bonuses. There's a different environment now.
Yeah, but hang on, but Rachel Reeves was unbelievably critical that Jeremy Hunt didn't reverse what was done by Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. And she said at a time, he's urging wage restraint for everybody else. How can he remotely claim it is fair to lift the cap on bankers' bonuses? That was 2022.
She was right to say, you know, in the first fiscal event after the Tories crashed the economy, that was their priority over getting help to people with the cost of living crisis. Of course she was right to raise that. But what Rachel has said today and what we've heard from businesses is they want stability. They don't want all this chopping and changing, whether it's on this issue or on corporation tax. I mean, I think that businesses and individuals don't expect to agree with everything that a government does, and there will be disagreements.
All right.
But what they do want is to have some certainty. And quite frankly, I am proud that Keir Starmer has changed the Labour Party to say we are as passionate about wealth creation as we are about wealth distribution.
All right,
We'll only deliver that in partnership with business. And that, I think, is the right approach.
Liz Kendall, thank you very much for joining us. What do you make of what you've just heard there? Which party is the party of business? Because I'll just show you the headline in the Financial Times. Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, launches new business council as Labour woos corporate sector.
Well, Liz Kendall lost the leadership election to Jeremy Corbyn, but she must feel like she's won today because the party has come so far in a few years. I mean, Liz Kendall there is closer, actually, to Liz Truss than she is to Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, she's talking about growth. She's talking about that's how you grow the economy. At the moment, I think if you ask most business people, they would say that Labour's the party of business. They seem to be cozying up. The event at the Oval is a sellout. People are complaining they didn't get enough face time with Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer. I think there is that wobble over green issues. As you identify, I think that's the one area where they're unhappy about the uncertainty and the oil and gas industry. But even there, they're having meetings, they're doing the work. And, yeah, it's quite the journey.
Well, I mean, I think it's very interesting that many of the things that Liz said I completely agree with. I think it's right that
Liz Kendall.
Yes, Liz Kendall, that she's talking about wealth creation as well as wealth distribution, and that, you know, they're not planning on substantially, you know, increasing taxes. But I think from the perspective of the public, you then have to ask, well, what is the point in voting Labour? Because a lot of the constraints that they've placed on themselves essentially make them very much indistinguishable from many of the things that the Conservatives are arguing for. So when it comes to actually choosing who you're going to vote, I mean, some people, I don't know if this is, I doubt this is, of course, the strategy, but some people will think, well, why vote for somebody else when they're arguing for the exact same things that the current government are doing?
And what I would say is that, you know, the party at the moment are looking at practical solutions to major problems. For a long time, the Labour Party have been criticised for not being a party of business. And we're doing that because, as Liz pointed out, it's essential to grow our economy. And to grow our economy means that cities like mine bring in businesses and create jobs that pay good and well-paid positions.
Right.
But in terms of the party, you know, we are different from the Tory party.
How when it comes to the sorts of things we've just been discussing?
And I suppose if you're looking at, you know, issues around immigration, for example.
Well, now let's stick with business. On these sorts of issues, is there anything to distinguish the parties?
I would say, yeah, there are things to distinguish in terms of the looking at the taxing, the looking at supporting business, the looking at the wealth distribution is very key and critical in terms of how we look at supporting our most deprived communities. But in terms of engaging with businesses, we're doing something that we were criticised about for an awful long time.
Yeah, for not doing.
You know, but we need businesses to bring in good jobs,
right?
You know, and being able to do that.
Right, I mean,
important.
They're stealing all your thunder if people believe the sort of traditional reputations of the parties. There's nowhere for you to go.
Well, I welcome the copy and paste again, because they've effectively pledged to do exactly what we've done, which is, you know, that's absolutely fine. That's an endorsement of what we're doing. And even the cap on bankers' bonuses, you know, I'm not bothered about that, so long as they're paying their taxes and so on. That's actually a benefit, really. So when you're talking about business and the party of business, you look at the things that we've done in recent years, they're not going to roll back any of those. Things like full expensing, we're still doing that. Today we've announced things like Help to Grow for SMEs. But in terms of being a party of business, Jo, if you look at the Conservative benches, you look at people like Jeremy Hunt, you look at people like Mel Stride, all had successful businesses. The business minister, Kevin Hollingray, ran a nationally renowned estate agents. These are all business
But they're
people.
all packing out Labour's event on business. Labour is now the party of business, isn't it?
Well, I'm sure that, you know, they want to hear what people have got to say. They'll probably be reassured a little that they're going to copy all of our policies, but maybe they'd like to have heard some of Labour's themselves. But really, where is the experience with Labour for business? You look on the front bench, there is no business experience that's there at all, and I think the businesses will pick up on that.
Kim?
Well, I don't know the background of all the people on the front bench, so I can't answer that question. But what I would say is that, you know, business are really important for our economy and moving forward.
Right. I mean, it's interesting. The Bank of England, by the way, have held interest rates again at 5.25%. There's an ongoing debate as to when they might start to cut the rate. Now inflation is falling, or the rate at which prices are rising is slowing. Obviously, Rishi Sunak is banking on improving economic figures. Yes, inflation coming down, maybe interest rates come down. But are people listening to what the government is saying on economics and business?
Well, Rachel Reeves actually worked for the Bank of England, so she does have that background. And we have a piece, funnily enough, in Politico today saying that Rachel Reeves has kind of grabbed the public's attention. Do you remember a BBC producer called her boring snoring a few years ago? Now she's boozing schmoozing, Rachel Reeves. I mean, she seems to, her polling shows that she's quite popular. So, I think she has grabbed the attention. People do seem to like her and trust her. She's cut through in that way that a lot of politicians haven't.
Inaya?
Yeah, I do think it is true that Liz is not Liz, Rachel Reeves is cutting through. And I think talking about growth, talking about growing the economy, Labour's slogan, getting Britain's future back, I think these are the kinds of things that people want to hear, that actually that the country is going to be transformed and actually there is a vision for the future. But in terms of the substantive policies, I think it's still weak, as we've just heard that many of the things that the Tories are doing, they essentially just want to continue it. We're not seeing real radical policies that are going to magically improve the economy and get money in people's pockets and create wealth. There's a lot of rhetoric, but I don't think it's met with the policies as of yet. I
mean, Kim, do you agree with your party not to reimpose the bankers' bonus?
Well, we look at what happened in the 1980s, Jo. Bankers, crashed the economy. Banks had to be bailed out. So, looking at bonuses, I personally would feel that we need to look, differently at those issues.
Would you like to see the cap reimposed?
I personally would.
You would?
I would.
So you're disappointed by what the Labour Party is doing. You said your party is pursuing practical solutions. Is this one of them?
The party and Rachel will see it as a practical solution, as a backbench MP from Liverpool with lots of disadvantage is an issue. We need funding to be able to grow the economy, create jobs and particularly support our local authorities. My local authority has been cut to the quick. 63% of funding taken away from 450. We've got, more children entering into social services. We need something that looks at these, really pertinent issues that are in our communities at the moment, in the country that we need to support.
It's interesting because Kim is the second Labour MP, backbench MP. Barry Gardiner was sitting here. He disagrees with this decision. How big a problem is this potentially, or is it not?
I think it's not a problem at the moment because I think they feel that the left, the leadership feels that the left isn't a huge influence, that they are a voice slightly in the darkness.
I'm a Labour MP, you know what I mean? I don't want to be categorised, OK.
I think going forward, it becomes more of a problem, actually, and particularly in government, particularly if that majority isn't as big as the polls now suggest, which almost certainly it won't be because the numbers will crunch a bit. And I think at that point, then people will be upset and they will need the votes of people like Kim and Barry Gardiner to go through the lobbies to get their legislation through. And if they feel that they're constantly sidelined and their views are constantly being not heard, then that creates tensions.
Let's go into the chamber because I understand that the debate is underway. This is on the new Northern Ireland deal. It's the new agreement that we've been discussing the last few days for fewer or no checks on goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland that resulted in the DUP agreeing to end their 2-year boycott of sitting at Stormont. There could be a vote at the end of the debate. In fact, we can just see Chris Heaton-Harris, the Northern Ireland Secretary, standing at the dispatch box, or it may well be nodded through. There's certainly enough support for it. And as long as there are no further issues, then Michelle O'Neill will become the first Sinn Féin politician to become First Minister at Stormont, possibly being sworn in as early as Saturday. That's going on in the chamber at the moment. We're going to talk about Rwanda because one of our guests here, Brendan Clark-Smith, resigned from his post as a deputy chair of the Conservative Party. We can show you here, Sunak faces revolt over Rwanda bill as 2 senior Tories quit. One of them was Brendan, the other was Lee Anderson. And now that was a couple of weeks ago, and we'll discuss that in a little bit. But today, in the Daily Express, there's another front page story on the Rwanda plan. 5,600 migrants identified for first Rwanda flights. Now, it's their exclusive story, although yesterday, in front of the Home Affairs Select Committee, James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, didn't say how many migrants will be sent to Rwanda. Now, the bill, which seeks to declare Rwanda as a safe country, has opened up significant dividing lines within the Conservative Party. It was debated for the first time in the House of Lords on Monday. Let's hear from a couple of Tory peers.
I do admit some doubts as to whether the bill in its current form is going to be robust enough to achieve the desired end. I think it would certainly have been better if it had been amended to strengthen the exclusion of international law as proposed in the Commons. In my view, we will one day have to go there in this area.
Unfortunately, in the light of subsequent events, we now have this bill, and at the moment, having considered it carefully, I must say I think the details of this bill, or its main point, as in Clause 2, are a step too far from me, and I don't think I could possibly support this bill unless it is substantially amended.
David Frost and Ken Clarke there. Clause 2 of the bill that Ken Clarke was referring to requires Parliament to treat Rwanda as a safe country. Brendan, why did you resign?
Well, the thing is, you just heard Lord David Frost there. I think that's a good explanation of why. So it wasn't a binary issue as to whether you agree with the Rwanda policy or you don't. It was more a case of that we didn't want to make it softer or harder. We just wanted it to work. So the debate is, until that plane actually takes off, we don't know. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to amend it. We wanted to put some extra safeguards that were in there. That amendment didn't pass in the end, but as somebody who was on the payroll to be able to vote for that, then I had to resign from my position. And they're the rules. There's no hard feelings about that. But then I did vote for it at third reading because I think it's better than having no bill at all.
Right, although some of your constituents might find that logic hard to follow. Lord David Frost also said that the government needs to ignore international law. Do you agree with him?
Well, I think Parliament's sovereign. That's why we had Brexit. We've just come up to the 4th anniversary of that. So if we're making laws in Parliament, this is what we're here for. That's the whole point. We should be able to pass that and things should be able to work. Now, if we get into the stage where we can't even influence things in our own Parliament, you know, there's no point people like me being here, quite frankly. You know, this is actually what our job is. So you can still look at international treaties, you can still be responsible, but if you actually having the will of the people, as we say, and we want to get those flights off, we should be able to do it, Jo.
Right. Well, let's just have a look at this headline, because you resigned alongside another, now former deputy chairman of the Conservative Party. Lee Anderson says he'd like his old job back and regrets Rwanda revolt. Do you want your job back?
Well, Lee didn't actually ask for his job back. He was asked if you were offered it in the future, would you take it? And Lee said, well, I've not resigned out of any hard feelings.
Well, any regrets? Do you have any regrets?
Procedural thing. No, not really. I think you have to stand up for what you believe in, and sometimes that means you have to make very hard decisions. Now, I'm still very committed. I still want to get this legislation through. I want to see the plane take off. We fully support the Prime Minister with that. We think he's got the right idea, and are still going to carry on campaigning for the party and supporting it as normal.
Right. What's Labour's plan?
Well, Labour's plan is to look at challenging the gangs that, you know, thrive on the vulnerability of people crossing the channel. But, you know, we've got 400 million, you know, has been spent on this gimmick of a scheme. You know, and what I truly believe is that, you know, we need safe and legal routes. We need to look at humanitarian way of dealing with this crisis.
That would take time, of course.
You know,
there are some safe and legal routes.
We've got a backlog at the moment, Jo, of massive cases. Even yesterday, you know, you showed that headline, 5,600 on the first flight. James Cleverly and the Permanent Secretary at the Home Affairs Committee could not give an answer to the numbers that are going to be flown out.
Brendan?
But I would just, can I just say, though, for me, you know, Rwanda isn't a deterrent. It's not a deterrent, but what we do need are more safe and legal routes.
Well, we don't know because it's never happened. Sorry, Anna.
What we've just heard there is that Labour do not have a plan. Looking at possibly looking at the gangs, I mean, that's just not a plan, is it? And when it comes to safe and legal routes, as I've said actually on this programme before, there are already safe and legal routes if you are an Afghan, or some, for oftentimes, can I just finish? People that are Afghan interpreters. We took hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians. We've also had a bespoke legal route for people from Hong Kong and often for Syrians as well. So actually, for oftentimes the most vulnerable people that we have a connection with, we have had safe and legal routes. If you just want a blanket humanitarian visa, then you're going to have millions, if not tens of millions of people applying. So that's just not workable. But respectfully, for the people that rebelled on the Rwanda bill, what I think this has essentially done is just given lots of arguments to the Labour Party. They totally trashed the bill, saying it was unworkable, that it wasn't robust enough, and then ultimately voted for it. That's just giving ammunition to the opposition, surely. So it seems kind of pointless at the end of the day that there was the amendments and the rebellion.
Brendan?
Well, you've heard Labour's solution, which is to make illegal migration legal migration.
I'll come on to that, but in response to what Inaya said about you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, so the Prime Minister said there's a very narrow landing strip with this, and we're working within this Blair-era legal framework that we have and within the ECHR, and with that we've got to make the law work within that. That's why the legislation has been so difficult and why we've had a disagreement on it. Now, if that plane doesn't take off with what we're trying to put through at the moment, then that adds to the argument, again, people like myself who would like to reform or even question our membership of the ECHR and maybe change the whole legal framework. It may be that we actually have to do that. But what I'd say to those people in the Lords debating this at the moment, if you want to prove people like me wrong and you want to show that actually you can remain in the ECHR and you can keep the legal framework, then it's their incentive to make sure these flights take off.
Do you believe that under the current legislation, flights will go off?
I think it will be very difficult. I certainly hope so.
So you don't think it's going to happen?
I think it could do, and I think we don't know. So even if our amendments had been accepted, there's nothing to guarantee still that under the legal framework that we've got that it will take off. So until it does, we just simply won't know with the legal challenges.
Can I just make a really quick point? It's not the exact same bill, but actually we've just heard in the last week that Giorgia Meloni in Italy is going to be processing asylum applications in Albania. And actually the European Union described it as out-of-the-box thinking. They thought about it quite positively. So whilst it's not the exact same bill, there is nothing fundamentally immoral, unworkable about processing asylum claims offshore or using other countries to support you.
And the courts have said it is lawful. It's Rwanda that they say isn't safe. Rosa?
But if you are somebody who genuinely believes we have too many migrants in this country, surely the route you want to go down is to tackle legal migration. And it seems to me that it's a big sort of side issue for the government, a big distraction. Most people say that what they're concerned about is cost of living and their own well-being. They do worry about there being too many arrivals, but really this legal route is probably the more pressing one. Now, somehow Rishi Sunak's got himself in a situation where the Archbishop of Canterbury is standing up against him, where Baroness Hale, who, as you remember from the Supreme Court, with her spider, is standing up. Ken Clarke, who we heard earlier. This is a fight that he seems to have picked almost to reassure people like Brendan on the right of the party that he's one of them. And it seems to me that it's been a massive distraction. All through Christmas we were talking about this. It's going to come back again. And as he goes into an election season, is this the conversation he wants to be having rather than, as we talked about, the economy, which might well be starting to come round?
Well, let's stick with the idea that those, some of them, maybe not Brendan, will ask him, who are against the Rwanda plan in its current form, they want it to be toughened up, has led to an awful lot of speculation about plotting against Rishi Sunak. The Times, the plot to replace Rishi Sunak with Kemi Badenoch. She has X Factor. Then another headline in The Guardian. Oh, that'll be Kemi Badenoch on the phone for you. Kemi Badenoch is member of Evil Plotters Tory WhatsApp group. And finally, as the group is now called in The Independent, the Evil Plotters WhatsApp group is a joke, but it could kill the Tory party. Who are these plotters, Rosa?
Yeah, there's a group of them. We don't know exactly who, but certainly people like David Frost, who commissioned the poll that showed every single Conservative MP exactly how much danger they're in come the general election. There are some special advisors. There are some MPs. They've got offices and everything, and they're going around talking to journalists like me all about their plans. They don't quite have a candidate. Kemi Badenoch doesn't seem too into it. Suella Braverman is on some people's lips, although she's seen as quite divisive. But they certainly think that there are danger moments coming for Rishi Sunak, first with those by-elections and then the May local elections.
Right. I mean, are you one of the Evil Plotters or part of the Evil Plotters WhatsApp group? It's the name of a WhatsApp group, to be clear.
No, absolutely not. And again, divided parties don't win elections. So I think people are fed up of this now. It's getting a little bit daft. So what I would say to any of those people who are thinking about that, get behind the Prime Minister, support what he's trying to do and show that as a united party we can actually deliver for the public, because that's what the real issue is, not about personnel, it's about policies and getting them done.
Are you in that WhatsApp group?
No, and I wouldn't want to join it either.
You wouldn't?
No.
Have you been asked?
No, I've not, no.
Right, you've got complete confidence
Absolutely, 100%.
in Rishi Sunak.
Yes.
Will they have any success, this group? Because they are, most of them, unnamed, apart from a few that we know about.
Well, Kemi, said over the weekend that, she completely backs the Prime Minister. I think the only thing that it's going to do is to divide the party more, and I think it would just strengthen Keir Starmer, that the Labour Party are essentially, or at least ostensibly, united and a government in waiting, and the Conservatives are fragmenting and fighting lots of battles and trying to replace one another. Many of the things that have got us into this mess over the last year or so anyway. So I don't think it's going to be effective. I think it's not the right thing for them, and I think it will make the Conservatives just look weak.
Let's talk about something different. BBC News headline, Kim Johnson, our guest here, MP inspired by TV show to launch bid to reform. We're going to show you in a moment a clip. You saw a little bit of it in the headlines from the BBC drama Common, written by Jimmy McGovern. It's a fictional story that tells the tale of a group of young men who are all convicted of murder, even though they didn't all strike the fatal blow. And it all comes under the law called joint enterprise. Kim, can you tell us why this drama inspired you to try and change the law on joint enterprise?
Because it depicts just how wrong the law was, because a young boy took his friends to a pizza shop to buy pizza. Then while they were there, they committed a crime, and he was committed for a crime he didn't commit. So my private member's bill, that's having its second reading tomorrow, is looking at tightening up the law, the 1861 law on the accessories and abettors, to say that no one who commits a crime shouldn't be convicted if they haven't made a significant contribution. And we've got lots of data that says that there are thousands of young people being prosecuted at the moment, but under joint enterprise. Well, the CPS did a survey last year, and they identified from that small survey that 1,088 had been convicted under the law of joint enterprise. But it's not just the social impact it has, but it's about the financial burden that the criminalisation under joint enterprise, has on taxpayers, but also our crumbling prison services and systems.
Right, well, yes, Inaya.
So I think it's totally right that we look at our criminal justice system and see if there are areas where injustice or miscarriage of justice is taking place. But when it comes to the joint enterprise law, I would argue that it is an essential law to convicting gang members and even people involved in paedophile rings. There are many cases, murders, some of the most serious crime, where someone may not have committed the fatal blow, but they were essential to that particular crime being committed. A few examples. Someone might have held somebody down, knowing that someone was attacking them. People often might knowingly drive perpetrators to the scene of the crime, knowing that if it wasn't for them driving them there, knowing that that person would not have been killed. And sometimes they don't even have to have been in the room. There have been cases, and I think rightly so, where people have been in private WhatsApp chats or other private group chats where they have knowingly given the location of someone that they knew the other people in that chat intended to seriously harm or murder. So I think that it's very easy to say that, oh, well, they didn't actually commit the crime itself that led to the serious harm, but oftentimes they are absolutely essential, and that often happens when it comes to gang members, and it's right that the crime addresses that.
And I think the punishment should fit the crime. And I'm not saying do away with joint enterprise. I'm saying that the law needs to be tightened. The 2016 Jogi case, the court identified then that the court had taken a wrong turn and that the law wasn't used in the right way. However, since 2016, what we've seen is that an increasing number, and it is essentially young black men, because the CPS identified that black men are 16 times more likely to be prosecuted under joint enterprise.
Yeah, well, black men are also 24 times more likely to be murdered than their white counterparts. So there's also the issue of involvement in certain types of criminal behaviour that we need to look at. Taking particular statistics in isolation without looking at how some communities may or may not be involved in certain types of crime, I think is missing the bigger picture. And just because black men may be disproportionately impacted does not in and of itself mean that that law is being misused.
Right, let me just show you this headline, BBC News, because you referred to this in 2016, joint enterprise law wrongly interpreted for 30 years, Supreme Court rules. So it looks as if it's a long overdue change if the Supreme Court feels it's been wrongly interpreted.
Well, I think that, as I said in the beginning, if there are miscarriages of justice happening, I think that we undoubtedly need to look into that. Nobody wants somebody to be wrongly convicted. But the principle of joint enterprise, where somebody may not have committed the fatal blow, but they had essential involvement in that crime, is absolutely right.
Brendan?
I think that's a key point. So I watched that drama as well, and it was incredibly moving, and it certainly made me think twice about it. So I think it's looking at the miscarriages of justice, making sure that the law is used properly. But
will you back him? Will you back him?
Potentially, I'll have a look at it, certainly, because I think it deserves respect. It's trying to solve something where there is potentially a problem. But what I would also say is we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because this legislation was also used, I think the Stephen Lawrence case actually is probably one of the prime ones. So used correctly, it's actually got some good uses. But as Kim said, we want to get it to work properly. So certainly that's what we're there for as parliamentarians. We're there to scrutinise legislation, see if it's actually working, and we'll see whether we can improve it or whether it needs changes or not.
Rosa?
Yeah, I mean, that seems very sensible to me. I once was actually called to jury duty in a joint enterprise trial, and it was a trial of a dozen young black men. It was an extraordinary scene to see them all lined up in the dock. Some of them, I'm sure, would have been on legal aid, the cost that took. The trial was going to take a year. My employer objected. I was excused from the case in the end and didn't have to do it. But as you say, it has so many knock-on effects. It's the prison system, it's the justice system, as well as their individual lives.
Right. Anaya?
With serious youth violence absolutely soaring in this country, I kind of think that the idea that just because certain communities might be disproportionately impacted, that in and of itself means that that is a problem or that something is being misused. Actually, I think a lot of parents in this country, black, ethnic minority or otherwise, actually want to ensure that the police have the resources and the tools they need to get seriously violent, dangerous people off the streets. And as I said before, just because someone may not have stabbed or shot that gun, they may be seriously involved. And I would like to understand, and respectfully with the bill, I'd like to understand, in some of those, what example cases would you point to that you think the joint enterprise law shouldn't have been involved? Because I think I read the article that you wrote, and you mentioned the young gentleman that was convicted on that law when he was involved in the private chat. And I think that, to me, I think that is a legitimate use of that law. So
is it the law or the decision-making around that?
I think a lot of it is around decision-making as well, because, campaign groups and the legal profession often refer to this as playing with Russian roulette, and I'm not, saying we need to get rid of it, we need to tighten it. And there are a lot of examples, Brendan talked about.
Well, let's be careful about some of the cases that we've talked, we could talk about.
But there are some cases where joint enterprise has been used to convict, and rightly so. But it is, and it should be about where a significant contribution. So if someone does drive and they're knowingly going to somewhere to commit a crime, then that is, joint enterprise, because they knowingly did it. And a lot of the people that I've been made aware of through the campaign group, Joint Enterprise, Not Guilty by Association, they have campaigned for an awful long time, campaigning for their family members who've been incarcerated.
Well, Brendan sounds, certainly he's going to look in detail. Have you got the government on side on this?
Well, I've got,
very quickly, unfortunately,
Sir Bob Neal, who has sponsored the bill. He's the chair of the Justice Select Committee.
So you've got some high-level support?
Oh, yes, we have.
All right, that's all we've got time for, but thank you to all of my guests, and there'll be more Politics Live on Monday at 12:15 on Politics UK this afternoon.